All right, so we got our scene. It's looking pretty gray and pretty boring. So let's add some color to our scene by getting a little bit of crash course to 3D materials in Cinema 4D and Redshift, which is the name of the renderer that Cinema 4D uses. So if you want to access your material manager, you're going to go right up here and click this little shader ball icon. You can alternatively hit Shift F2 to open it up. And if you want to create a new material, you can just click that plus button there, or you can double click anywhere in the material manager here to create a new material. And I just created two, so I'm just going to go and click this material and delete to delete it. And I just wanted to call out this little area here, which is a bunch of cool, really helpful Redshift material presets that are at your disposal. So you got a whole bunch of them here. And the cool thing is that you could search for any type of material. So if you want to search for, say, leather materials, you have a whole mess of options at your disposal. So just wanted to make you aware of that. It's a great base to get started, just kind of texturing things in your scene. But I want to show you a little bit of the nitty-gritty of how you can build your own materials from scratch. Now, we're not going to get super in-depth with materials, but if you want to dive deep into Redshift and materials and renderers, I highly recommend you check out the Getting Started in Redshift series on Cineversity here. But let's go and let's double click on this material to open up the node editor. Now, this might seem a little bit intimidating, but trust me, it's not really that hard. What we have here is just standard material and standard material properties, like how reflective is it? What's the color of this material? And then all this output is saying, okay, whatever we have here, whatever material properties we have, we are outputting to the surface of our object. Nothing more than that. So if we want to go and change the color of this material, that is where you go to the base color and click on this little color chip, and it'll bring up this color chooser. Now you can move this around. You can click this button right here, and this will give you different ways to basically choose colors. So we have the hue and saturation, we have the RGB sliders. We also have, if you have specific hex colors from, say, a client, you can enter them right here. And you can also load up custom palettes. You can save custom palettes. You can also load up and sample colors from an image by loading in an image here. And then you got your color wheel as well, which is really super handy if you want to, say, use the split complementary type of setup where you can easily just create all your colors and you can just sample them right here. But in our instance, we're just going to close that up and go to our normal color picker. And one really cool thing that you could do is, say you have a color palette, like I have this color palette here. What you can do, and I'm going to move this off screen, is you can use this eyedropper tool, and I'm going to go off screen and sample one of the colors from my color palette or my color swatch. And so what's really cool about this is you could use this eyedropper to select anywhere in like a web browser or anywhere off screen, even in the interface, and sample a color and load that up. So I really love the eyedropper tool. I use it all the time. I sample colors from whether it's Pinterest or something that I'm using as a reference. It's really cool to be able to just use the eyedropper tool and grab a color from literally anywhere. And so that's the color. Here's the overall weight of that color. And then if you want to give some kind of metal properties to this material, like say you have like a red metallic type of material, you can crank this metalness up and you can see now it's very, very shiny metallic looking material. But we're not going to deal with any metal in this scene, mostly just kind of plasticky looks and glass. And so next up here is reflection, which we have the overall reflection here. And I'm just kind of talking about this stuff. It's way more helpful because we are all visual people if we actually see, as I'm changing this, what's actually happening in our scene. So let me close out of the node editor here for now. And then to see what's going on, we're going to apply this material to our object. And you're going to see that when I release my mouse, it just applied this material to the fishbowl. Now I'm going to Command or Control Z to undo that because I actually want to apply this red material to our crab character here. So I can't do that unless I go and click and drag and drop this on our crab character here. And you'll see that what that did is it applied it to all of our objects. And you can see there's a little tag here, a little material tag that shows what material is applied to it. And so if you have 0 materials applied to any children object, that parent material is going to be applied to it. And that's not necessarily what I want, because all I want to do is apply this to like the base of the body here. And so what I could do is, let's fold up some of this stuff here, and I just want to apply it to the crab body. So what I could do is click and drag and just move this material down and apply it to this crab body object, and you'll see, voila, there we go. Now if we wanted to, say, duplicate that material and apply it to other objects, we can command click and drag and duplicate this to, say, the right leg, okay? Now there's much easier ways to apply materials than manually doing it one by one, and being able to select our object in the viewport is going to be helpful. So what I'm going to do is, for now, just go and deactivate all the objects that create and make up our fishbowl, and now we can easily just select whatever objects we want. So what I could do is select the claw, and this claw holding the shift key down and adding to selection. I can grab this little foot's over here, and then this foot holding the shift key down to add to selection. And so I have a bunch of objects selected, and if I wanted to apply that same red material to all these objects, what I can do is go to the material, right click on it, and say apply. And then I'll apply that material to all those selected objects. So if I go and hover my cursor over my object manager and hit S to scroll to active objects, you can see all of those selected objects now have that red material applied to it. So super handy. And so what I'm going to do at this point is I'm going to double click on that matte, that default name, and just name this red. And then we can either go to the base properties here and adjust them down here, or we can double click and open that node editor again and adjust the options here. They're the same exact thing, so you can adjust them wherever you want. So I'll just close out, and since this is a little bit easier just to deal with this window, I'll just go ahead and do that. Now let's go ahead, and since we're going to be starting to play with reflection and stuff like that, let's actually bring up our render view. And you can access that by going and clicking and holding on this little option here, the little play button, and we're going to go to Redshift render view. And basically what this is going to do is bring up a preview render view that we can go, and if we hit play, let's bring this to the center here, we're going to get a render view of what we have in our scene. Now we can dock this anywhere in our layout, which is super handy, by clicking and holding on this little hamburger icon, and we can go and drag this anywhere. See how you're highlighting sides of your UI here? So I can release my mouse and I can dock that right here, okay? So anytime I move this around, it's going to update in my render view over here. Now, we're kind of cutting off a lot of our view, so what we can actually do is be a little bit more economical with our space and bring the hamburger down and place this and dock this below our object to give ourselves a little bit more space. And then you can see my material manager got moved over here, so I can go and move that back over here, and you'll see my UI got a little bit crunched over here, so I'm just going to go and move everything back over like so, and there we go. So we can also make our material manager a little bit bigger by sliding this over, and we can adjust the size of our preview here by clicking and dragging on this little option here, so we can see everything a lot bigger. And then we have these different views in which we can visualize our material. All right, so let's go back to our material here, and let's give ourselves a little bit more space. And let's go down to the reflection here and adjust the roughness, and we can actually see what's happening live in our render view here. So if we bring up the roughness, basically what that's going to do is make the surface of this material look a little bit more rough, and it's basically going to blur out those reflections, okay? So I like, for like a plasticky kind of look, maybe we'll give this a value of like 0.6, so it's a little bit rough. And so for plastic, that's really all you need to adjust in this material. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add some more materials, and I'm going to base it off of the settings that we already dialed in on this red material. So I'm going to command or control click and drag to duplicate that red material, and I'm going to name this pink, and this will be the color for our coral. And so what I'm going to do is, again, get that eyedropper tool. I'm going to go off screen again where my color palette is and sample that pink color. And there we got the pink material loaded up, and we're just going to go. And what we could do is something else that's pretty cool is I can go and click on this little magnifying glass. And as long as you've named everything appropriately, which I highly recommend you do, what you can do is say, okay, I want to apply this pink material to all the objects that are coral. And since I named everything correctly, I can type in coral and that will filter out all the objects that are my coral. And so what I could do at this point is select all of these objects, right click, and go to apply, and you can see I just added that material to all those objects. So I can easily filter things out versus, again, kind of laboriously selecting all the objects in my viewport here, and you can do that all at once. So very important to name your objects. Not only are you helping anyone you may be working with, but you're going to be helping yourself way more by being able to filter things out by name and just access objects a lot easier. So I'm going to clear out that search bar to bring back all the objects, and I'm going to command click and drag again, and I'm going to name this like teal. So this will be kind of our seaweed. And so I'm going to go and use the eyedropper tool, sample the seaweed color that I have here. And I can just drag and drop this on the leafy seaweed and command click and drag to duplicate that, and that'll apply that kind of teal color to that seaweed. And I made a second seaweed color to be a little bit more darker, to have a little bit more contrast. So for that, I'm going to get a dark blue color that I'll sample again off screen here. And I'll apply that to the seaweed group null. And the cool thing here is that, again, because I applied that material to the parent object and none of the other seaweed objects underneath it have any material tags, those objects are just going to inherit the parent material tag. Okay, so super cool, super easy way to be able to add materials to multiple things. Now I'm going to quickly go and duplicate all the rest of the materials and apply them and come back. All right, so I have one last thing to add a material to, and that is this fish eye. And so I wanted to demonstrate one thing, is that hierarchy is very important. So I'm going to go and apply a black material to that pupil. And you'll see that I couldn't, because what it's going to do is when you drag and drop in the viewport, it's going to apply it to the parent object here. So if I wanted to apply this to the pupil, I would have to go and just drag that down and do like so. And then I could go and drag this white material on top here, and you'll see that again, the iris, the parent, has the white material, but because the child object has its own material, it's not going to get overridden by the parent material tag. So hierarchy and how materials work is very important to understand. But at this point, the only thing we have left to add a material to is our bubbles and our fishbowl. Now we're going to be dealing with reflections and transparency, so those can kind of slow down our render. So one thing I want to kind of make available to you is changing one thing to give you faster previews, and that is going to your render settings, which is right here, and we'll get into more of the render settings later on. But if you go to the Redshift option here and click on denoising, what this is going to allow you to do is be able to get faster render previews here, which is really great. And so with the denoising, it's actually using a little bit of AI here. And you can see as I kind of move around here, it's super snappy and much faster because it's doing that whole denoising thing. Now, another thing that I like to do as well is you can see when you're rendering, you might have noticed you're getting this progressive rendering as it's progressively cleaning it up over time, and it's using a bunch of passes. Now, very rarely will you ever need this many passes. So one handy tip for you, just put in like 64 or something low so it's not always calculating. You can see how quickly that kind of updated. And for something, a scene this simple, you don't need that many passes. So you can see what's going on there, and you can limit the amount of time that you're hearing your GPU fans spin up constantly. So let's talk about making a bubble material that is transparent. So what we're going to do is we're going to double click, create a new material, and let's double click the name and name it bubble. And so we can go to the base properties right down here, and we're going to go down to transmission. Now transmission is basically transparency, okay? And so if I increase the weight here, you're going to see, let me actually zoom into my bubbles here. Let's actually apply this bubble material to our bubbles. And so you can see there is my bubble material applied to the sphere that is then being cloned. And you can see that we can actually see through it in the viewport, which is pretty cool. But if we select this bubble here, we can go down. And again, transmission is where all this is happening. You can see all that refraction happening, where light's kind of bouncing and bending as it's passing through the object. And so we can make this kind of like a cloudy type of bubble by adjusting the weight here. We can even add a color tint to this as well. So maybe we want a little bit of like a blue hue, we can do something like that. And so let's say that's looking pretty good, and we're going to get even more deep into the transmission options here as we deal with our fishbowl. So speaking of our fishbowl, let's actually go, let's roll some stuff up here. Let's turn back everything on by clicking and dragging down to turning those X marks into checkboxes to activate everything. You can see we can't actually see anything because our fishbowl has no material on it. But one thing we can do is we could just, again, start from scratch, or we can use that handy Redshift material preset menu here, and I can just search for glass, okay? So there's so many different types of glass, and let's actually increase the size here so we can actually see what those names are, or we can go to this kind of view and see what the names are this way, but then the preview's small, so a little bit of balancing act here with that. And so you can see there's some smudged glass, there's some dirty glass, there's thin-walled glass, there's imperfect glass, so there's glass with condensation. So there's a lot you can choose here, but what I want to do is just choose your basic glass. So what I'm going to do is just double click on that basic glass material. That's going to load it up in our scene, and I'm going to click and drag that onto our fishbowl. And now we can see right through our object. Now, since we have no background, no objects in our background here, it's a little bit hard to see what is going on. So let's actually create a backdrop. And just like we used a preset material, we're going to go into the other presets menu up here, which is the asset browser. You can open it using Shift 8 or just clicking this button right here. And you can see I've already been using it for certain things, but this is where you can access all those materials. There's models, there's HDRIs, there's template scene files. There's a bunch of awesome assets in here. But what we want to grab is a backdrop. And so if I just type in back, you'll see here's the studio backdrop, and I can just double click on it to add it. Alternatively, you could just go and drag and drop this into your scene using the place tool, or you can drag and drop it into your object manager. And in addition to the asset browser, you can find the backdrop in the create menu here, along with all the other primitives. So let's scale up our backdrop by hitting T for scale and just scale this on up. Make this super big. We can even go to our 4-up view, and now you can see, okay, we have a background. Now we can see what that glass material is actually doing, because with reflections, it's all about the objects or the environment that are surrounding that object that object is then reflecting. So if we go to our backdrop options here, you can see in the object tab, we have settings like the width, where you can see that updating right here. And let's actually just pause our render here for a second while we're adjusting these things. And so you can see the rounding there is adjusting this rounding. The extrusion is making this basically, if I go, let's just go full screen here. The extrusion's kind of pushing out forward basically this bent plane object here. We got the width, the height, the depth. So a lot of really awesome options in here. You can have this kind of drop off at the front here. I'm just going to right click this arrow to bring this back to its default value, which is 0. Same thing with the drop, reset that to 0. And so now we have a pretty good backdrop here. And since I'm done playing around in the asset browser, I'll just close that out, and then we'll just fire up our render view again. I'll give the render view a little bit more real estate here, since we're just kind of going to be dialing in materials at this point. And so the first thing I want to do is we have this default backdrop material here, which you can see I selected this material, and it's highlighting this material here. Remember, we added 2 backdrop objects and I deleted the one. So this is the extra one. So I'll just go ahead and delete that. So it's very handy, especially if you have multiple materials that kind of look the same and you're trying to figure out, okay, which one is actually applied to this object. Just select that material tag and it'll highlight that in the material manager as well. Okay. So if we go to our backdrop, we select this material. There's that backdrop object. Here are those settings. It's got a little bit of roughness. And so what I can do is actually just choose a color. So I'll actually sample the blue color from off the screen there. And I would say this is looking pretty good. Now you can decide whether you want any reflection at all. If you don't want any reflection at all, you can just bring that weight all the way down, and you'll notice a little bit of that reflection kind of disappear there. But I'll leave that in for right now, and you can kind of see what's going on here and that glass, okay? So let's dial in these glass settings for the fishbowl. So I'm going to select the basic glass here. And again, this is a preset material. So some things are changed already, like the roughness. The roughness is at 0.02. And I just want to bring this up. So just like with the material, the basic material, how it kind of blurred out the reflection, because we're dealing with glass, it's almost like it's creating this frosted glass effect, which is super cool. Now we'll just bring that back down. So we'll add a little bit of roughness there because not everything is perfectly smooth. So maybe I'll put in a value of like 0.05. Get a little bit of roughness there. And then the other important thing when dealing with glass is this IOR. So IOR stands for the index of refraction, or basically how much light rays bends as it goes through the surface of the object. So if I really bring this up, you're going to see how much that light is getting distorted. And so that scene preset had a value of like 1.53 or something like that. And that's kind of like the physically accurate value for glass. But since we're doing a little bit more of a whimsical stylized render, we can kind of play around with this value a little bit. And so what I'm going to do is maybe bring this down to like, let's call it 1.23. And that's the kind of reflection that we'll get. So I'm digging that. Again, we can tint this a certain color if we wanted to, which I'm not. But there's a bunch of different things that you can kind of mess around with. There's also extra roughness, which is basically going to create that frosted glass look again. But this is not on the actual reflection. You can see how the reflection on the glass is still shiny. But if I bring up the roughness here, you can see that's going to blur that reflection and also blur the transmission as well. So you can kind of play with both of these values. So if you have roughness here, but you want no roughness on your actual refraction, you can offset it by putting in the negative value here, which is what this was set at to begin with. All right, so everything's looking good. Just wanted to show you if you wanted to set your UI back to its default, what you could do is I'm just going to close out of this Redshift render view, and I'm just going to click on this standard, and this will reset your UI back to its default view. And if you wanted to, you could go back to your Redshift render view and you could dock it here or wherever you wanted to and start working all over again. So reflection's looking okay, but we have no lights in our scene, so it's not as good as it can get. But don't worry, we're going to be covering lights and dialing in some nice reflections on our fishbowl and in our scene in a later video.